Our format this evening will be that I'm going to introduce each of our speakers and let them make any brief opening remarks that they would like to make. And then we will move to questions and answers. So please go ahead and begin posting questions that you have for our speakers in the chat box, and we'll get to those in just a minute. I'll read the questions and let our speakers answer them as they feel led. So let's go ahead and get started. Kyra Roby is a policy analyst at One Voice. She has previously served as an Equal Justice Works AmeriCorps Legal Fellow and as a staff attorney for the MacArthur Justice Center in New Orleans, Louisiana, and as a partnerships specialist for the U.S. Census Bureau. Kyra received her Bachelor of Arts in International Studies from the University of Mississippi and her Juris Doctorate from the University of Mississippi School of Law. Kyra, would you like to make a couple of opening remarks?
Hi, Nancy, and hi to everyone that's joining us tonight. Thank you so much for, first of all, inviting me to speak on this panel. You know, we've been kind of working diligently over the past maybe year or so to oppose the elimination of the state individual income tax, which is really such an important issue. And when we think about the ties or the impacts that such a tax policy would have on education, on teacher pay, on our public schools. This is really a subject that we have to continuously to fight about, and that we have to make our voices heard. So thank you again for having me, and I look forward to the discussion tonight.
Excellent, thank you. Oleta Fitzgerald is Director of the Children's Defense Fund's Southern Regional Office and also serves as the Regional Administrator of the Southern Rural Black Women's Initiative for Economic and Social Justice. She has worked across the South and in Washington, D.C. on education, economic, and justice issues for children and families. Oleta is a graduate of Tougaloo College. She serves on the board of the Mississippi Head Start Association and is a member of the Global Women's Action Network for Children, as well as other boards and organizations in Mississippi and nationally. Oleta, would you like to make some opening remarks?
Yes, thank you, Nancy. And I'm sorry I was struggling there with this Zoom connection for a minute. Really appreciate being part of this conversation and seeing all of you all on the Zoom. I see a lot of old friends I haven't seen in a while. Nancy, as you know, this conversation regarding education and the economy is the chicken and the egg conversation. I mean, it's just the basic conversation that we always have. And I'm looking forward as well to talking about this issue, because it's one, as you and I have talked about, that needs to be elevated from just a conversation about fully funding the MAEP formula. If Mississippi is going to grow and thrive, we've got to talk about a larger vision for education in this state, and everybody has got to buy into it if we want the state to grow and keep our children here. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you for being here. Dr. Ed Sivak is the Executive Vice President of Policy and Communications for Hope Enterprise Corporation and Hope Credit Union. He currently serves on the board of Inclusive and as the president of the Jackson Public School District School Board. Ed received his Bachelor of Arts in History and English from Marquette University, his master's degree in public policy from Georgetown University, and his PhD in public policy and administration from Jackson State University. Ed, would you make some opening remarks, please?
Yes, good evening, Nancy. It's great to be here, especially on a panel with Kyra, Oleta, and Scott. I'm really excited to hear their reflections as well. Just a little bit about Hope Credit Union. You know, Hope is headquartered here in Jackson, Mississippi, and we employ well over 200 people. We have operations in all 4 congressional districts, and we recruit talent regionally and nationally. And from an employer's perspective, the size of the tax cut and the implications that it has for investment in our K-12 system, our higher education system, it concerns me greatly. I actually think it limits our ability to compete for talent. I also have concerns about what it does to grow our own as well. And so I'll get into more of that as we move into the questions. Taxes and investment and education are integrally connected. You can't have one without the other if you're going to do it right. And so, again, really appreciate the opportunity to be before this group today.
Thank you for being with us. And Scott Waller is President and CEO of the Mississippi Economic Council. Before joining MEC in 2006, Scott worked as a journalist, newspaper editor, and business owner. He is a graduate of Mississippi State University. Scott serves on the State Workforce Investment Board and the National Transportation Investment Advocacy Council, as well as several other boards and organizations in Mississippi and nationally. Scott, would you make some opening remarks, please?
Yes, thank you, Nancy. And again, I'd say hello to everyone and appreciate the opportunity to visit with you all this evening. MEC is the State Chamber of Commerce. We are a private, not-for-profit organization that is funded solely by the business members that we have throughout the state of Mississippi. And in June of last year, we completed a fairly tenuous process, because it ended up being delayed because of COVID, of putting together a true strategic plan for the organization. As part of that plan, we outlined 5 areas that we saw as very important for helping move our state forward. The first one, and number 1, was education, workforce development, skills training. So without question, we understand the value of this. MEC has had that position for a long, long time. I've been there for 15 years, and at least 10 years before me arriving at MEC, education had become one of the key issues that we needed to focus on in terms of making sure we were preparing all of our young people across the state in a manner that would allow us to have the workforce we were going to need to be successful as we go forward. Just 2 weeks ago, we released a report entitled Securing Mississippi's Future and Economic Vision. And in that report, we outlined the importance of focusing on education, workforce development, skills training in a very, very heavy way. So it's something that we believe is very vital for our economy, very vital for the future of our state, and more importantly, done the right way, will create job opportunities to keep and retain and attract some of the greatest talented young people we can find, not only that are here now, but we think we can get to the state of Mississippi.
Terrific. Thank you. All right. Well, we'll get straight to questions for our panelists. If you all, our participants, have any questions that you would like our panelists to answer, please put them in the chat and I'll read those for you. But we have had a number of questions submitted ahead of time, so we will begin with those. And panelists, I'm just going to let you all, whoever feels led to answer these questions, or if each of you feels led to answer them, feel free to jump in, and we'll just have kind of a casual conversation this evening. And we are going to try to cut it off at 6:45. We promised an hour, so we'll try to get to as many of these questions as we can. All right, question number 1. Please talk about the responsibility of state government to provide services that Mississippians need. What role do taxes play in our ability in Mississippi to work together for the common good? Anybody want to take that?
I can take it. So what we've been saying and what the work, how we really got into this space around the income tax fight is our work, One Voice's work to promote an equitable tax and budget system in Mississippi, and what the impact of an equitable system means for everyone. And really, I think what it boils down to is nobody really likes to pay taxes, but when we think about the primary purpose of the tax code and the primary reason why we pay taxes, it is so that we can come together to build on the strong foundation of creating a society where everyone has an opportunity to thrive. And so when we pay taxes, we are helping to fund the government and fund the services that we all want, we all need, and we all use. That includes the state's public education system, that includes infrastructure like roads and bridges, that includes healthcare, that includes revenue that supports corrections. So all of these services that we want and we need, that our communities need to thrive, that is paid for through the state's tax system. And what we ultimately would like to see is Mississippi have a more equitable tax system that allows everyone to pay their fair share of taxes. And what we know right now is that the state of Mississippi has a regressive tax system. That means the state's lowest income earners pay a larger share of their income in taxes than the state's higher or wealthier income groups. And when we do that, what we're really doing is that we are restricting our ability to raise the revenue needed to pay for current services that we have, but also we are jeopardizing our ability or threatening our ability to invest in services that we would want and that we would need to see a better future Mississippi. And so that's kind of how the taxes kind of come together to help fund the government and fund the services that we all use.
Thank you. Anybody else want to jump in on that particular question?
I'll jump in, Nancy, and let these two business people come. Us two women will go first. I like to say to people, I'm really just kind of a common sense kind of person. Facts matter. Everybody pays taxes. Most people, when we are talking about folks who pay taxes, seem to think that poor families don't pay taxes and are not paying into the general fund of the state of Mississippi. If the way I think about it is everybody pays sales taxes just like any of the others of us. And if you are renting, if you're a homeowner or if you're renting a house, I doubt seriously that your landlord has figured his rental rate without figuring in what he has to pay in taxes. So regardless of who you are paying taxes. State government would have nothing to work with if it wasn't for the taxes we pay. They have no money except for what we give them. And if that's the case, then we should have equity in our tax structure so that those families paying in can have the services they need to function in society. There are more low-income folks in Mississippi than there are upper income families, which means there are more, we pay more taxes. Our rates might be, the amount we pay might be different, but overall, there are more of us paying in. So I think it is the responsibility for state government to look at what's good for all of its citizens, because we all pay taxes.
Well, I'll just kind of follow up to what Oleta said. There is no revenue that's not coming in some form. But at the end of the day, the purpose of the revenue is to make sure we're funding our core needs of a state, whether that's education, public safety, transportation. So we cannot think about it in a vacuum of saying, well, we remove this tax, take care of that tax, and take care of it. We've got to look at it very holistically. And I think one of the things that we have stressed at MEC over the past year is that there's something that we need to really focus on in terms of looking at any change to the tax system. Is it fair? Is it consistent? Does it provide the funding necessary for the core functions of government? I think sometimes there's this idea of, well, look at what state X is doing in this particular tax area. Well, that's fine, but we also need to look at what they're doing in the other variety of tax areas that exist. And I think that's one of the things that has really come out in this most recent debate is that it's real easy to say, well, there are certain states that don't tax personal income, but we really don't talk about the things that they do tax. on the other side of that, whether that's a larger sales tax, whether that's a larger property tax, or whether that's other entity level taxes for business that are different than what we're doing right now in the state because of the structure that we have. So I think just to simply look at it in a very narrow way of saying, well, this is a tax that other states don't have, we need to get rid of it, and that be the reason for it, is the incorrect approach. I think the right approach to any change in our tax system has to be to look at it at every aspect of what are the balances, but more importantly, we do a lot of work at MEC with national organizations, and one we work with very closely is a group called the Council on State Taxation. And when this first came up, they were the first people I called. The first thing that they said was, make sure that you're spending the time to look at the entire tax system of any state you may try to emulate. Otherwise, you're going to miss something. So that has been something that we have been stressing from day one in this process of anytime you're looking at making a major change to the tax code, we've got to look at more than just one thing. And I think that's where we see this is to really be effective and find the right way of doing it, to find that equity across the board. You can't just look at one tax and say removal of this is going to solve the problem if we do X without understanding all the other intricate parts of what certain states across the country are doing in their tax system. There are 50 states, there are 50 completely different tax systems, and we have to understand that.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you all. We do have a question in the chat that says that is a good segue from your answer, Scott, was a good segue into this question, which is, what is the proposed alternative to replace the income tax? Because there's a proposal to eliminate the income tax, which I suppose I should have said at the outset. And that's one of the things that we're discussing this evening. And so the question in the chat is, so what's the proposal to replace those funds in the state? Scott, I think you're muted.
There are two different proposals on the table. There's one from the House, there's one from the Senate. And real quickly, as I understand it, on the House side, part of the revenue replacement would come in the form of increasing the general sales tax by 1.5 cents on the dollar. The original proposal was 2.5 cents on the dollar, which that doesn't sound like a whole lot until you look at it. Again, what are we currently taxing? The current tax rate is 7%, and we go to 2.5. That's really a 36% increase in sales tax in the state. Same with this current one at 1.5. That's about an 18. Is it 18, Ed? Somewhere in that neighborhood? He's shaking his head. Yes. So really, it doesn't sound like much when you're talking about 1.5 cents, but most things you buy is not just going to be $1. So that's where the difference comes in raising the sales tax. And then the other part of that is then economic, just basically growth of revenue is going to make up the difference long term under their proposal. The Senate's proposal is a lot more conservative, I guess is probably the only word I can come up with. They want to slowly phase out the 4% tax bracket, meaning that all income below $10,000 would then become non-taxable, and then we would keep the 5% tax rate on the remaining income. Under their plan, there is no increase in revenue. It's not nearly the same amount of money that's going to be taken out of the budget, and it takes it as a step at a time. As the first step being remove the 4% bracket, see what happens before we do anything else. So two really vastly different plans. Quite frankly, a big gulf between the two plans in terms of what how quickly they do anything. But at the end of the day, the legislature is at least now talking about anything that's done needs to be done kind of in this process of saying, okay, we have one side here, one side there. So the next question is, over the next 30 days, will there be any type of compromise in a proposal that comes forward? And that's really the the question at this point that could ultimately be the $1.8 billion question for the state of Mississippi.
Great, thank you.
And Nancy, can I respond to that too?
Sure.
So I think realistically, and something that we always try to push is that tax cuts don't pay for themselves. The individual income tax right now generates about $2 billion in revenue for the state. And we're talking about eliminating or tinkering with any part of that state revenue, somebody's going to pay. And generally what we see in the states that have eliminated the state income tax, there are 9 currently that do not levy a state individual income tax. Many of these states have either the highest sales tax rates or property tax rates in the nation. And so what we see is the elimination of the state individual income tax driving up other taxes, whether that be on the state and or local tax basis. The other thing that we see as a result of the elimination of the state individual income tax, when there's no revenue to replace that existing tax, as Scott was mentioning, in the forms of how we take taxes from other things or how we levy taxes on other things, is that we see a reduction in spending on state services. And this was mentioned during the Senate debate on the Senate bill. Even though that bill would result in less revenue reduction in the state, the alternative to even that plan was either, if it doesn't work out, we either have to raise taxes or cut spending. And so those really are the alternatives to these tax cuts. Mississippi has passed over $577 million in tax cuts. I think we've had over 51 tax cuts since 2012. The largest state tax cut occurred in 2016, and we really don't have much to show for it. And if we continue to take away important revenue that's needed for the state, we will see the alternatives being increased taxes in other areas, or we'll see reduced spending on the services that we've talked about at the beginning.
That is a great lead into another question that we have had submitted, which is, our neighboring states outspend Mississippi by an average of $1,200 per student on public education. That lack of resources puts Mississippi students at a disadvantage. Mississippians have consistently said they support better public school funding. How can we get there, and what difference could that make in the overall health of our economy, our workforce, small businesses, and family life?
I'll jump in here, Nancy, and I'll probably put on my school board hat in answering this question. I just want to acknowledge Mr. Frank Figures as well, who also serves on the Jackson Public School Board with me. So, you know, the notion that, first of all, developing a school district budget is really hard. It's even harder when you live in a community that's losing population. It's even harder when you live in a community where there's a significant number of children who come from low-income families. It costs more to educate, should cost more. It does cost more to educate children who come from low-income families. But we don't really acknowledge that fact as a state. So if you're coming from a low-income family to start with, you're effectively getting underfunded in multiple ways by the policy decisions that our state legislature has made. You know, we struggle to pay teachers enough. I was just at a conference last week with the Mississippi School Board Association, and they cited a study that was conducted by the Mississippi Department of Education. And you know, there's this trope or this myth out there that teachers will say it's not about the money. It's really not about the money, but that's not true. And this survey confirms that it is about the money. You know, all of us at some level look to earn a certain amount to take care of our families. And frankly, we don't pay teachers enough to take care of their families. So when you talk about, you know, $1,200 additional per student, we're talking about money that can be used to pay teachers a much fairer wage. We talk about, you know, we've had to cut counseling services in our school district. Think about the effect of cutting counseling services during a pandemic where, you know, the mental health of all of us, much less children in low-income communities, has just been devastated. And so, you know, the fact that we are talking about cutting taxes at a time where our children have been struggling with the pandemic, where our teachers have been asked to do more than ever before. To be honest with you, after the limiting of voting rights, I can't think of a single set of policies that will do more to structurally disadvantage Mississippi's children than these tax cut proposals that are on the table. We will simply, as Kyra said, we will not make up that money if it goes away. You will not grow it back. The only place to get it is from other taxes. And the extent that we don't do that, it will affect businesses. And let me just give you a story of how it affects us. Hope Credit Union is a lender. And one of the things that we see often is people who have student loan debt. And the amount of that student loan debt can often be the difference between being approved for a home loan or being denied for a home loan, or being, having to wait further. It could be the difference between being approved for a car loan to get to work or not. If local governments are going to be expected to increase taxes, and then student debt is going to have to increase because tuitions are going to have to increase because there's less money for our higher education system, it's going to affect people's ability to borrow money to get into homes, to borrow money to get cars, to get to work. So it will affect our workforce. It will affect our ability as an employer, as a lender. And like I said earlier, we recruit nationally. And if Arkansas, whichever state is paying $1,200 more a head, the fact of the matter is they are just going to have a higher quality education system. And if all things equal, if someone's looking to move to the region and the system is better over there than it is right here, they'll go there. And so those are just some of the realities that we deal with from where we sit at the credit union.
Nancy, can I jump in there with Ed? This past year, we commissioned a study of an analysis of school districts. It's 6 counties, 13 school districts across the state of Mississippi, comparing the demographics in A school districts to the demographics in D and F school districts. The counties were Hines, Madison, Rankin, Lowndes, Washington, Jackson, and the school districts in those counties. And then I think Western Line was an outlier. And the data that was collected was strictly coming from the Census Bureau and from the Mississippi Department of Education. And what you see in these school districts is that teachers have to deal with the product they receive. In school districts and in communities where there are 2 parent households, where the median incomes are higher and jobs are there, where children have benefited from early childhood education, there is the difference in the product that walks through that school door. And as Ed was talking about, it takes more when you have a child that's coming in with a series of weaknesses, entering kindergarten with a series of weaknesses. So there is a clear story behind the demographics and the economics of an area and the impact that it has on the child coming through the schoolhouse door. So unless we're going to deal with that, the areas that have higher economic opportunity have school districts that are producing better assessments. The areas that lack in economic opportunity are the school districts where there is a lack and where the teachers have a larger job of bringing that child up to the scratch line, as if I could say it like that, so that they are ready to learn. And then when we penalize those districts because their children are not performing at the level that we think they should, without the resources that they need for teachers' assistance, for using assessments, for alignment programs between early childhood and K-12 public schools. So there is, and out of all of the districts, I'll end with this, out of all of the districts, when you looked at those demographics, we still are not producing in this state career and college ready students. Madison County had the largest percentage of students that were career and college ready, and it was like somewhere around 58%. So we need to have a different kind of conversation in the 21st century about what we're doing with children and how they're going to be able to function. So I just want to jump in there with Ed on, you know, all of these things matter, and we don't have that conversation.
Excellent, thank you.
So I'll just real quick say, I agree with what Oleta said, is we went around the state and we would talk to people in the community about their schools. And it was without question, looking at the socioeconomics, the demographics, all those things, it was pretty easy to see where the community felt like the school was doing well versus where the community felt like the school was not doing well, directly tied to those types of things in that process. So it's a real issue that we at some point are going to have to address in a way that, and I've got my opinions that I'll get in trouble when I mention, but I mean, we've got to let teachers be able to teach. We've got to find the right things for them to do to get their students prepared. And quite frankly, having a grading system that penalizes you when you're not in that same situation that some of the other school districts are in because of that very reason is not how we get there, in my opinion.
Great. I'm going to ask one more school district question, and then we've got several that are back on kind of on the economic development and taxing issue. So we'll get right back to those. But let me ask one more from the earlier submissions. And this is, some state leaders say that local taxes should make up a larger portion of the funding for public schools. What do you say to that when we know that different tax bases across the state have different abilities to fund their local schools? What does Mississippi need to do when local taxes most likely will always play some role in how well our schools are funded?
I'll start on this one. I actually think there's a lot of bias behind that statement. If you live in a rural community in Mississippi, you're probably living in a district that is losing population. And so if you're losing population, the only way you make up your local difference is by raising those property taxes. And at some level, there's going to be a cap on how high you go. If you are in, and then there's also, you can't talk about this without talking about race either. If you look at the majority Black counties in the state, most of those counties are losing population as well. And so, we really need to check our biases in those things. It's easy to make that statement if you live in one of our communities that's growing. If you're sitting on a school board and you've got to approve, it's easy to approve budgets if you're in a community where the population is growing. There's more students, there's more money coming in because the money comes in per head. But if you're losing population, in the local tax base is the only way to do it, you're going to get hit twice. And so I think that's a very it's an inequitable mindset. And so I mentioned the racial bias around it, but I also think, if you're a rural white person as well, and your school district is in a rural community, that's going to affect you also. And so we need to be mindful of that. And, just one other point to build on some of the things that Kyra laid out earlier is, it's healthy for a state budget to be funded with a diverse set of revenue streams. Diversification is just a fundamental principle of finance, of economics. And so, when you start pulling out large chunks of revenue and ways of collecting that revenue, you're basically making your system of public finance weaker. The other point that was made, if we shift to a system, and I know this was a local property tax question, but to Scott's point, when he mentioned you got to look at it all in totality, that's really true. If you look at our sales tax, people earning roughly $16,000 a year, which is about minimum wage. If you worked, 2,080 hours and never had a break and worked 40 hours a week, they pay 7.7% of their income towards the sales tax. If you look at people in the top 5%, people earning, 160, 170 up, Sorry, I went on mute. I was saying that if you look at the people earning 160, 170, it's only 1.1%. It's a much smaller percentage. And the fact that we're talking about shifting to that mechanism, we're placing more of a burden on the state's residents who need more investment, not more extraction.
Thank you. Great. Okay, we have, we're going to shift a little bit to economic development. Scott, we have a question for you that says, in your opinion, what are the top priorities of companies and large corporations when selecting new locations?
Well, I don't think it's just my opinion. I think it's fact. Workforce is number one. Do you have a quality workforce? There are surveys that come out annually that talk about what are the key things that are driving it. And, you know, there was a time that incentives was the goal. What incentives can I get to come? Now that's definitely secondary to actually two things: workforce, the ability to train and have the workforce necessary for the jobs they're bringing. And also there's an infrastructure factor in there as well today, particularly in being able to move goods and services. But without question, from a corporate perspective, from a site selection perspective, that's it. But even as we go around the state, and as we did back in our, you know, the fall when we held 51 small group sessions to develop our plan that we did on securing Mississippi's future, with such a vast majority of it focused around workforce development and education, is that they felt like that still was an issue with the companies that are here already. So it's not just the companies that are looking to move here. It's the companies that we have. We're struggling to find the right formula to educate the workforce in a way that they can be productive. Today was our Capital Day event, Nancy, and I would be asleep by now normally, but I stayed up just for you. But at any rate, I will tell you, we are very excited about something we're getting ready to work on, and that is we just received a grant from the Woodward Hines Foundation to work on our educational attainment goal for the state of Mississippi. The Education Achievement Council last year set a goal of 55% of Mississippians having either a four-year college degree or higher, an associate's degree, or industry certification in a certificate of value in an industry where there's actually a job waiting on you when you finish that will actually be productive. This, I think, is going to be a major factor in helping move our economy, because the more we can educate our citizenry, the better we can be. And the research shows, and this comes straight from your alma mater, Georgetown. They tell us that 65% of all jobs today require some type of post-secondary education. So we not only have to get them prepared and get them through high school, we have to get them prepared and through high school ready to move to that next level of education if we're going to be able to have that workforce to address the needs that the businesses that we are looking to bring here, the businesses that we currently have here, will be able to be successful as we go forward. So this is a challenge, but it's a challenge that it's really an opportunity, in my opinion, for us to change the face of our state by focusing on the importance of not only getting these types of certifications, getting these types of post-secondary education programs designed, it's getting them designed in a way that there are outcomes, that once someone finishes that program, they're ready to go into the workforce, be successful. That's how we're gonna move the needle. And until that happens, it really is not going to matter. And I think that's the whole thing that we're trying to focus on right now, is making sure that every step of the educational process, and MEC, I will tell you, we go all the way down to pre-K. On the 17th of March, we're helping do a summit looking at the importance of not only quality childcare, but childcare with a quality and strong educational component to make students better prepared. We've got to use our resources in a better way. So this is the issue that we face in Mississippi. It's not uncommon. I mean, I'm part of these national groups. We're not the only state. I think we just need to really focus on it if we're going to move the needle, probably a lot harder than most.
Excellent. Thank you. We have a comment and then another question about the tax cut effort. The comment is Mississippians have to make a choice. Does the state want to remain 50th across socioeconomic spectrum and continue to lose its smartest and brightest? Teachers shouldn't be forced to rely on payday loans to make ends meet. And the question is where, and I think this refers to the tax cut proposals. Where did this effort come from and what is driving these elimination efforts? Is it strictly ideological? Is it a national effort? Kentucky and Oklahoma and other states I know are also trying to do the same thing.
Nancy, so we've seen across the nation where these large money interest groups are promoting the elimination of the state individual income tax in states across the country. And so, yes, just during this legislative session this year, we've seen similar proposals in Arizona, Georgia, Indiana, Iowa, Michigan, South Carolina, Wisconsin, and West Virginia. And all of these are, one of the big, one of the big things about pushing the tax cuts is to promote small government, I guess. We know as well, though, that the elimination of the individual income tax is a tax cut that benefits the wealthy for all the reasons that we've stated so far. Wealthier individuals contribute more to the income tax than they do to sales and property taxes, as we've kind of stated. And so we've seen as well some of the inequities that follow these sort of policy pushes. But what we know is factually that these things don't work. We know in looking at the states that have already eliminated the state individual income tax that they've seen slower economic growth, slower growing average income for residents, that they've seen little to no improvement on the economic outcomes of their residents, despite some of them having population growth, and that in these states that do not levy a state individual income tax, they for sure have a higher tax burden on the poor than the states with higher tax rates. We've also seen that of the states that cut taxes most sharply in the 2010s, 4 of the 5 saw slower growth and slower growth in jobs and a decrease in personal income than did the nation during the same time. So no matter what proponents of these tax cuts are saying, the data and the research says the exact opposite. These tax cuts don't promote business growth. They don't result in population growth. They don't promote population growth. There's really no direct correlation between income taxes and any kind of competitiveness or economic argument today.
Thank you. All right, here's another question. Why do we hear so much about not having enough money to meet Mississippi's needs, like maintaining roads and bridges, paying teachers a living wage, taking care of foster children appropriately, etc.? But when it comes to helping wealthy people avoid taxes, it's all, sure, we've got plenty of money, whatever it takes for that. Anybody want to comment on that?
It boils down, Nancy, to who our policymakers play to. And if, we have so many people elected to office that don't represent the people who sent them to office. And, money is just drives so many things, as we all know. So I think money and interest that's tied to political interest is one of the reasons. And that's who's buying the lunches and dinners and receptions and trips and all of that has to be figured in.
And Nancy, oh, go ahead, Kyra.
I was just gonna say, just simply, to me too, it's an issue of priorities. Similar to what Ms. Oleta is talking about, it depends on like who your priorities are, not necessarily what they are. I mean, Scott and the business community have said over and over that a skilled workforce, education, all these things are top priorities for business leaders. Educators are saying what their top priorities are. Rural communities are saying what their top priorities are. Seniors who pay little to no income tax are saying what their priorities are. But again, as Oleta mentioned, when some of the policymakers are playing to particular groups or particular interests, the needs of the people, the needs of the community, and ultimately the needs of the state are washed away.
And again, that's why the initiative process is so important. So that the people can have a voice in what happens down there.
And I just wanted to add to what both Oleta and Kyra said, particularly on the first part of that question. So why do we hear so much about not having enough money to meet Mississippi's needs? Well, there's some basic facts. One is the state's losing population. Similar to a school district that's losing population, as the state loses population, there's just going to be fewer people that make up the tax base. Second, we have a lot of people who live in poverty. People who are in poverty are not going to be able to pay as much in taxes, even recognizing that the burden is higher if you are a low-income person, if you are in a situation where you're living below the poverty line. It's still, the fact of the matter is we have a large population relative to every other state in the nation that is experiencing those economic circumstances. So how do you fix those things? It takes investment. It takes investment in schools, it takes investment in teachers, it takes investment in the healthcare system so that we can make sure that people's health needs are addressed. All of these things take investment. We can't get, one surefire way to slow that down is to remove the very function, the thing that we have to reinvest, and that's the revenue that's generated from taxes.
Excellent, thank you. Well, there's a great question, which is, what can volunteers, regular old people, the people on this call, what can people do to help to improve the situation?
I will speak to it from the business perspective. One of the things that we learned when we surveyed our attendees prior to the meeting is there's very little connection between particularly K-12 education and the true needs of the business community. So as a result of that, what you have is an educational system that is following a model to turn students out. And then once they get there, they don't really have any idea of what their opportunities may be. So as we go forward, one of the things that we would really like to see is that we find a better way to connect not only just the businesses with K-12, but the community in general, because it comes back to where there is community involvement in the schools, there tends to be a whole lot more success within those schools. When there's business involvement within the schools, there tends to be a whole lot more success, because then people are demanding an outcome that's easier to achieve. And I know I say this, and this may sound somewhat ideological, but by the same token, that type of support will go a long way in helping them understand the financial support that's needed on the other side of the equation, so that basically they're all in it together. And that's where you see communities where there's a strong support for the school system. Typically, if a bond issue comes up, it passes because they understand the value of it. And I think until we can get that kind of approach throughout the state, particularly in some of our rural areas and some of our other areas across the state, that we really need to understand that this isn't an us against them thing, that if our communities are going to be successful, we've all got to work together, and it begins at the schoolhouse.
Can I jump in, Nancy, and say something there?
Well, we can't open this to others, Kay, or we're going to limit the speaking to our speakers tonight because otherwise
Understood.
we'll have chaos. Thank you. But I do have another question for our speakers, which is, what do you believe is the best thing legislators could do to move Mississippi ahead?
Have vision. Kyra's going to give you the tick, but I think that that we lack a vision in this state. That we need to talk about education, and Scott and I have had this conversation. We need to talk about education in the framework of a 21st century economy, and where and how our children are going to be able to participate in that economy. So that to take the conversation to make it greater than this group of people versus that group of people, but what will grow Mississippi? How can our children function in an economy in this state? But having that larger conversation, and not just about what happens at the Capitol. Where is the world going, and how are our children fitting into this framework? What is it going to take for Mississippi children to be able to function in a 21st century economy? And I think it's a business conversation. It's a business and an education conversation. It's not a political conversation, in my estimation.
And I think on our end, we would just encourage lawmakers to put people and put investments first. I mean, we were reading a story a few hours ago about one of the state lawmakers proposing to hold up $1.8 billion in American Rescue Plan funds if the tax cut, the House's in particular tax plan isn't passed. I mean, what does that say when Mississippi, with all the needs that we have, is sitting on $1.8 billion, and our top state lawmakers are suggesting to sit on that money unless these tax cuts get passed? I mean, in reality, it's just ridiculous. I mean, we see the needs of the people. State agencies have been asking for this money, and we know that there are needs in the state. And so if our lawmakers are focused on putting people first, they're focused on those investments. We talked about it being said that Mississippi doesn't have the money to do this, we don't have the money to do that. Well, we are directly responsible for that, because there are ways to strengthen state revenue in order to pay for the needs of the current needs of the state and for future investments. But our state lawmakers have to take the opportunity to do that. And by focusing on a single policy like the elimination of individual income tax, it makes all of these things, especially the vision that Oleta was talking about, very short-sighted.
Well, I'll just say this real quick. I mentioned earlier that we just 2 weeks ago released our economic vision from the business community's perspective. Does it cover everything? No. Is it the perfect plan? No. But we feel like it is a really good start. But General Leon Collins is the chair of MEC this year. General Collins made a very good point today at our Capitol meeting. Says it's a good plan, but if we don't find ways to execute it, it's going to be worthless. But he also pointed out that one person, one group cannot do it. It's going to take everybody. And I know not everything in that plan is going to match with what you believe, but something tells me there are some things in that plan that will. And those are the kind of things that we have to work on together for us to really say, this issue right here is important. Let's figure out how to address it. And that's going to take everybody doing that. So I encourage you, if you haven't had a chance, take a few minutes. It's not a heavy read. You can knock it out really probably in about an hour, and even less than that if you just skim it. But it's really got some decent information in there. And everything in there came from the information that we received by listening to citizens across the state over a 2-month period in our roadshows.
And I'll just close. I'm convinced more than ever, we need to invest in the upward economic mobility of all Mississippians. If we invest in the upward economic mobility, if we get people into stable jobs, by making sure that the workforce system, the higher education system, the pipeline from pre-K all the way through, that it is turning out the most highly qualified people, the ready to compete on a global scale. If we invest in people being healthy, we invest in people getting into homes and starting small businesses. Where you see the strongest school districts, you see upward economic mobility. We need to quit limiting that to a certain few, expand that to all. And when we make those investments, that's what I believe will truly move Mississippi forward.
Excellent. Okay, well, we are right at our hour. So thank you to our wonderful panelists, Oleta Fitzgerald, Kyra Roby, and Sivak and Scott Waller. We really appreciate you spending an hour with us this evening, Scott, especially at the end of a very, very long day for you. Thank you. Everyone, if you don't receive our emails, please go to that link at the very top of the chat to sign up to get those emails. We'll keep you updated on what's going to happen with this tax cut. You can also follow us on social media. And next week at the same time, next Thursday, we're going to hear an update on the current legislative session from the Mississippi Legislative Black Caucus leadership and the minority leaders of both chambers. So if you all, I hope you'll join us then. If you signed up for this one, you're signed up for that one as well. So I hope to see you again next week.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you again, everybody, so much. And y'all have a great evening.